YT have enjoyed purple patches of success in years gone by, most notably by a name that has cropped up on this field test already, Aaron Gwyn. While the Tues may have been a mainstay of their lineup for well over a decade, it's only recently started racking up the wins again under Oisin O'Callaghan and now Valentina Hull. But is it the perfect race bike, or sticking to YT's remit of making very good bikes that just so happen to cost less?
So Matt, there's a new YT that was good enough, hopefully, to tempt Valley Hull back to the German brand. So is it a massive overhaul compared to the old version? I imagine it's completely different and there are no similarities compared to the outgoing version.
No, I mean, it looks virtually identical.
It's the same bike.
It is. So in the past, they had a full 27 and a full 29-inch wheeled bike. Now they've amalgamated those two into one, and you can choose between a 27 or a 29-inch rear wheel. And they've done that very elegantly.
Yeah,
it's a well put together bike. There's a lot of adjustment. There's a high-low BB and head angle adjustment. There's a 5mm chainstay length adjustment, and all those adjustments work for any wheel size or frame size combo. So no limitations there, which is pretty cool.
I love the wings that you can just flip over to go to 29 or 27.5 out back. And of the other bikes that we have on this test that offer some degree of adjustment, I would say this is one of the better ones going between wheel size. I think it's really, really well done. Now, during that very exciting prototypes phase where they obviously accidentally had it shot by a professional photographer in a custom-made shroud and it somehow ended up on the internet, there was a little idler poking out, which made us all think that something far greater was going on there.
Yeah.
Where the hell's the idler? Where's my idler?
So it looks like that was something they were just experimenting with for prototyping and whatnot, maybe for a future bike. But we also saw some of the team riders using the O-chain on there. And basically those two systems just work to negate a little bit of the pedal feedback.
Can a downhill bike ever really be conservative? Surely 200mm of travel quickly undoes that notion. Well, to say these bikes didn't give different feelings would definitely be untrue, and the Tues was on one end of the spectrum compared to something like the monster trucking Intense M1. But does that translate to speed or sketchiness when you get ready to drop?
Now this is clearly, well, it already is a very successful World Cup downhill bike, but that's not to say it's kind of on the more conservative side, this bike, hey?
Yeah, a little pointier head tube angle, a little shorter wheelbase.
Yeah, it feels like, you know, not to be too disparaging, but hopping on it and riding around the car park, it feels more like a long travel enduro bike. It doesn't suffer from that wheel flop that you get with really slack bikes. And even though the geometry chart is putting it, I think around 63 degrees, it feels a lot steeper.
Yeah.
Now, everything is a compromise. Why have they done this and what does it give them?
Well, it's funny that you made a comparison earlier, how maybe these elite level riders can take a more conservative bike and make it work for them. They get the most out of it in terms of like gaining speed rather than fighting to slow down. And you made a comparison going back to EDR racers where they're riding shorter travel bikes and able to take those and maximize the benefits that they have as a rider and their skill set over something that's more cumbersome. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose confidence doesn't win races. The fastest time wins the race.
Yeah.
If you're slightly more terrified but going quicker, you're not going to get deducted because you felt less safe whilst doing it. This bike then isn't some, you know, hole smashing brute. It's still very capable. To me, it struck me as actually it being a bit steeper, it having a lot of mid-stroke support, maybe not being the most supple, but still plenty of grip. It's actually a bike that would kind of be good all over the bike park. And if you want to smash a lap of A-Line or, you know, Dirt Merchant, as well as riding some horrible tech at Garbanzo, it can kind of do it all. And it's got a lot of pop.
Yeah, definitely a lot of support, easy to pump and jump through rollers and, you know, carry speed. And that's something that YT admits. They didn't want to build a flat out race bike. Like this was something that was going to be for everybody in all situations and they could tailor it to one direction or the other.
Now, we've got another 4-bar sort of layout bike on this test in the Frameworks. And the Frameworks comes with an O-chain for its, basically to sort of mute out that feedback you get from the drivetrain. This bike sometimes it felt a little bit noisy through the feet, especially on that high frequency, high speed chatter. Why don't you think more brands just put an O-chain from stock?
I mean, I think you can get used to that a lot easier than you can forget about a noisy or a chattery bike. Like that's always there, whereas the pedaling aspect, there is a small degree of lag when you push on the pedals and the chain isn't there immediately, but for everything else that O-chain system gives you, I think I can't see why you wouldn't put it on a downhill bike.
So this bike is alive then, both for good and for bad. There are certainly more confidence-inspiring downhill bikes, but also there are ones that are so slack they begin to feel numb and lifeless through the turns. The Tues definitely isn't that. On the frame, there are plenty of clever features. But what did we think of them?
Okay, so as we know, YT is a consumer direct brand, and they've launched this new Tues carbon frame only, 2 build kits. We have the top tier one. That one comes in at $5,999 US. That's almost the same price as the Frameworks downhill bike. Frame.
Right, yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of, there was a time where it felt like that sort of direct-to-consumer German big manufacturers kind of lost their way a bit and they started getting more and more expensive. This seems like a return to the roots. I mean, $6,000 is still obviously a huge amount of money, but compared to some of the other bikes on this test, it's a great spec.
Oh yeah.
There's nothing you'd really change. And it's a relative term, but it's relatively good value for what you get. Something, however, we did disagree on though, it's got 220mm rotors front and back, lots of power, the TRP brakes had lots of power, maybe not that much modulation.
Okay,
I found them quite grabby.
Yeah, I mean, we disagree on this. You like the Saints, I say the opposite about both of those brakes. I think the TRPs have more modulation, but I guess it depends.
I suppose where it is though, like the TRP, it feels, I mean, they've got so much power and modulation, but it just feels like it happens quite far away from the bar.
Yeah,
and that's the issue for me. It's not necessarily the amount of stroke to pull, but it just happens so far away and like, you feel like you just graze the levers and you have so much stopping power. It gets a bit untoward for me.
YT delivers a race-ready spec at a far more affordable price than, well, just about anyone else, all on a sleek-looking carbon frame. So, apart from somebody looking for a far better value bike than the rest, who is this bike for?
So when thinking about who this bike is for, I mean, it's hard to look past the value.
Definitely.
But also someone that perhaps kind of wants an all-round bike that no matter where they end up in the bike park, they're going to be having a good time. That said, how would you say it fares in terms of being an all-out downhill slugger?
Yeah, it's not the most aggressive sort of splayed out angles or wheelbase. Like it's not the longest, it's not the most confidence inspiring when you get into steep techie terrain. It does feel like your hands are up high and almost over top of the front axle. Similar feel to the Frameworks. Sort of this new school geometry I see in some downhill bikes where they're not as slack as they have been in the past, but you have this sort of tall standing stance on the bike with a really low BB. And the rear end's relatively short, I would say, for a race bike. So a longer chainstay might give you a little bit more traction or stability there too.
So how would you categorize this bike? Is it, because in some ways it is a really good bike park bike. At the time it clearly goes very fast on a racetrack. Would it be the bike that you would be grabbing if you were going to go do a race?
You know, if I had the choice to pick any one bike for any one track, this would probably suit something a little flatter, maybe even like Leogang where you have a lot of sprinting and jumping, but then also some tech sections because there is good support in the suspension. So you can generate speed, but you're also not bottoming out too much either. Like it rewards like an active rider, I would say.
What are the best and worst bits about this race winner?
I think the ultimate strength of the YT is that it's sharp, that sort of slightly steeper front, and it feels steeper than the geometry chart suggests. Can give a bike that is pointy on the front and is really easy, for me at least, to find the edge on. Plus, for a lot of people that want like an easy rider bike park bike, it covers off a lot of bases.
Yeah, I would say that's fair, but the one bonus to that though is it's a fairly light bike overall and it comes alive quickly, so that means it gets up to speed fast. Requires less energy to like pump and jump through things, but then when you do get into the tech, it is a little bit more to negotiate.
Yeah, it's definitely not sluggish. This is a really lively downhill bike. But like you said, when you get to tech, it feels like it just kind of hangs up a bit more. Maybe that's the sensation through the feet. It doesn't feel like it's the plow of something like the Intense or the Common Soul.
Definitely
And
not.
compared to the frameworks, it just feels that bit more, how would you say it? Like a bit more of a lightweight, really.
Yeah, it doesn't have that sort of quite as grounded as the frameworks and not quite as sensitive either.
The YT Tues is just about as versatile as a downhill bike could be. It's fast, and it will let you wring its neck on the racetrack and bike park alike. That said, it's not the single most confidence-inspiring downhill bike, and when the tracks get really committing, you might wish for something with a little less feedback through your feet, or a slightly slacker front end. This bike rides sharper and steeper than the geometry chart suggests, for both the good and the bad.